The vav consecutive imperfect verb is also known as the Vayyiqtol, and it gets that name from the Kof Tate Lamed paradigm word when it's put into the vav consecutive. It makes the word Vayyiqtol, and he killed. The vav consecutive imperfect form is made by taking the Yiqtol form, or the imperfect form, and adding to the front of it a vav, patak, and dagesh, and thus it creates the Vayyiqtol form. Now the basic sense here is Yiqtol is he will kill, so it's just your basic future tense as your default, and it has all the modals included in it. Once we do the vav consecutive, adding that to the front of it and make it Vayyiqtol, then the basic sense is and he killed. So it kind of switches it from a basic future tense to a basic narrative tense. And it's upsetting at first, I suppose, when we have the katal form, which has the sense of he killed, and then when we take this perfect form and we put the vav on the front of it, it becomes the vav consecutive form, so it has the sense of he will kill. And now we have something very similar in the case of Yiqtol, or the imperfect form, which is typically he will kill, because when we put the vav, patak, and yod on the front, it becomes a vav consecutive imperfect form, and he killed. Now, the good news is that it's not as confusing as it might seem at first with this sort of switch from a basic past tense to a basic future, and from a basic future tense to a basic past tense. We get used to it pretty quickly because they're used in different kinds of biblical contexts. And secondly, the nice part is the paradigms that we have to memorize for this verb form, the perfect, are exactly the same as the vav consecutive perfect, except for we have to remember to put a vav shva on the front. And the same thing is true for when we learn the imperfect form. All of the vav consecutive imperfect forms are exactly the same, just with a vav, patak, yod stuck on the front. Now, of all the different verb forms, the Vayyiqtol, or the vav consecutive imperfect, it is this form which more than any other really is used as the narrative tense. And this sort of narrative sense is kind of connecting the action, one action next to the one before it. And so we kind of move along in the story, and we have and then, and so on. So these vav consecutives are kind of consecutive in the sense that typically the next connecting vav consecutive verb is and then, or consequential if it's not temporally consecutive, and it would be and so. Let's look at an example. Jonah chapter 1 verse 3 has a series of these vav consecutive imperfect verbs, one right after the other, through the verse. And so they connect the action in a sort of and then sense. So the verse goes, and Jonah arose, and he went down to Joppa, and he found a ship, and he gave them fare for the passage, and he went down into the hold. So kind of the way the story goes is, and Jonah rose up, and then he went down, and then he found, and then he gave, and then he went down. A little bit later in the chapter, there's a problem with a storm, and so we have here a consequential relationship. So we have, and they were afraid, the sailors, and so they cried out. So again, your two main senses, if we're to over-translate, is to say, and then, or and so. This sort of temporal succession, or this sort of consequential succession. That's a little bit over-translated. Not all the verbs work like that. Some of them have a more simple form. Here's a rather straightforward example from Genesis chapter 36 relative to the kingly line of the Edomites. Vayimlok ba'edom Bela ben Beor. Now the subject is Bela, son of Beor, and the verb is Bela, son of Beor, ruled over Edom. So we can put the and he ruled, and Bela, son of Beor, ruled over Edom. That's just really a very simple sense for the verb. Here's another example from Genesis 35. Vayishkav et Bilha pi legash aviv vayishma Yisrael. And he lay with Bilhah, the concubine of his father, and the subject, Israel, and Israel heard. Now in this case, I think that we probably just take this in a very general sense, as far as, I don't know that it's consequential necessarily. I don't know if we say, and Reuben lay with Bilhah, and then Israel heard. It doesn't seem quite like that, so we're not sure of the temporal relationship. So I would just translate it simply, and he lay, and he heard. Take your time with these, but don't worry, they're very common, and we get used to them quickly. The Vayyiqtol, or the Vav consecutive imperfect, is extremely common. It is the narrative tense.